While hope runs high in the Middle East, we still have to deal with a lot of the BS. No need to worry, though. There may be a lot of 6-7 going on, but Netanyahu is here to help you. So today I'll touch on all of the major stories addressing us here in the Middle East, but also inside of Israel. So the first story here is, of course, the second stage of the Gaza deal has begun now that the last of our hostages was returned last week. And to give a fuller picture of what's really happening around the reopening of the Rafah crossing, I want to draw on a pair of analyses written by Israeli political commentator and pollster Shlomo Filber, because this isn't just a border issue. It's a central pillar of the post-war construct now taking shape, and he breaks down the issues in a very accurate way. Rafah was one of the biggest points of contention in Israel's negotiations with President Trump over the 20-point framework that he proposed. Israel captured the crossing and the entire Philadelphia corridor back in May 2024. We shut it down, we destroyed the tunnels, and effectively sealed off the weapons smuggling into Gaza. For the past year and a half, the IDF dismantled Rafah's tunnel network and created a 2 to 6 kilometer security zone, leaving Hamas behind it and besieged. From Israel's perspective, the crossing was not going to reopen until the very last hostage was returned. Despite the pressure from Washington, Israel held on to that principle. But in the end, Israel had to concede on the crossing, and Filber stresses that this concession came with significant gains for Israel. Israel retains control of 55% of Gaza. There is no declaration of the end of the war, and Israel preserves the right to return and finish off Hamas and the tunnels if necessary. There is also no Palestinian state on the horizon and no meaningful return to a Palestinian authority. Only symbolic gestures pushed far into the future if they meet the requirements. The crossing has reopened, but under very specific and restrictive conditions. Anyone entering Gaza must travel a long route through the Israeli-controlled Yellow Zone and undergo full security screening. Leaving Gaza will be easier than entering it. Israel originally wanted the crossing to open only outward, but Egypt and the mediators rejected that, seeing it as a symbolic endorsement of voluntary emigration. Meanwhile, Filber points out that Israel and the United States are building a massive transit camp in the Yellow Zone. That's in Israeli control. Gazans who pass the screening will be moved there temporarily. The goal is to clear civilians out of the dense urban areas in Gaza, making the next stages of the campaign, including tunnel elimination, far more manageable. Filber frames all of this as Phase B, the disarmament of Hamas and the full demilitarization of Gaza. No reconstruction will begin until that process is complete. He expects Trump to issue an ultimatum to Hamas to disarm within weeks, not because anyone believes that Hamas will comply, but to neutralize any diplomatic objections when the IDF returns to finish the job. Filber also points out something that isn't being discussed openly. The crossing is opening with a 1-to-3 ratio of entries versus exits. With half of Gaza in ruins and no real reconstruction on the horizon, the crossing may become increasingly attractive to Gazans who are seeking a way out. He suggests that Israel is watching this quietly to see how this develops. And he emphasizes that the Philadelphia corridor today is in far better shape than before the war. Instead of dozens of smuggling tunnels under the border, there is now a single monitored entry point under Israeli control. His bottom line is this: this is a calculated risk, but it is not the end of the fighting. Israel is giving the diplomatic track a chance, largely because of the broader strategic priority of confronting Iran with the American backing. But if Hamas does not disarm nicely, the IDF will return to complete the mission the hard way. For now, Filber concludes, all the leverage is actually in Israel's hands. The 2026 JNS International Policy Summit is coming up this April 15th through the 17th, once again at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Jerusalem. I'll be there, and I really hope you'll join us as well. You can visit jnssummit.org to register and to see the speaker lineup. It's an exceptional group this year. I look forward to meeting you in Jerusalem this April. With the transition to Phase B in the Gaza Strip, the question of what the day after will look like has become unavoidable. Israel Channel 12 News reported this week that a new player is interested in shaping the future of Gaza, and that is the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. Abu Dhabi has expressed interest in managing the civilian sphere, and their entry into Gaza would include an investment of billions of dollars. Negotiations are currently underway between the UAE, Israel, and the United States, and it appears that Israel will support the initiative. The United Arab Emirates are seeking to take responsibility for the entire civilian framework, with billions of dollars in investments, as I mentioned. According to the plan, several billion would be transferred immediately, with additional investments to follow. The United Arab Emirates intends to take control of managing all the markets in Gaza and its commercial activity. They will also send armed security forces to protect the logistical centers they plan to establish inside of Gaza. Alongside the Emirati security personnel, private American security companies will also operate in the Strip. The United Arab Emirates plans to purchase from Israel all goods entering Gaza and to use Israeli contractors. This, by the way, will benefit Israel's economy immensely, especially the towns and the kibbutzim that suffered the most during the years of Hamas attacks and especially October 7th. Distribution centers will be upgraded into full logistical hubs from which goods will be delivered to the private sector inside of the Gaza Strip. A government-to-government agreement is currently being drafted, which Israel still needs to approve. Abu Dhabi and Jerusalem have exchanged drafts, and Israel supports the initiative. Israeli officials familiar with the negotiations have said that the Emirates are offering to come in with full force and essentially become the civilian patron. The officials added they're taking a risk and are willing to get in between the legs of Hamas. We, Israel, support it. This will not replace dismantling Hamas or demilitarizing the Gaza Strip. It will only provide a civilian framework led by a moderate and productive actor. And as if to prove this point, while all this is taking place, Hamas will not go gently into the night. Even as the world talks about the day after, the Hamas are already laying the groundwork to keep them running Gaza from within the shadows, from behind the scenes, exactly where they thrive. A few days ago, Hamas leadership sent a secret internal memo to the organization's government officials throughout Gaza ahead of the technocratic government's arrival. The document lays out detailed do's and don'ts for how officials should conduct themselves when dealing with members of this technocratic government. It explains how Hamas will continue running the Strip's administrative system without the technocrats even realizing that Hamas remains in full control. The document instructs officials to continue their daily work routines as if nothing has changed. It explicitly forbids them from attacking the members of the technocratic government or its leader on social media. At the same time, the officials receive a clear directive, and I quote, "Do not establish any personal contact with them and do not pass along any information or reports except through the relevant authority." And that relevant authority, of course, is the Hamas. People in Gaza are sharing how Hamas is trying to hide the presence of its armed terrorist groups. In interviews given to Israeli media, Gazans describe how Hamas are scattered throughout the streets, not always in uniform. Operatives in civilian clothing move among the ruins of what remains of Gaza. They monitor who is filming, who is speaking, who is complaining, who is resisting, and who is cursing Hamas. Sounds familiar? It's very similar to what is happening right now in Iran. Hamas is trying to conceal its capabilities and its military strength from the cameras and from international public opinion. Hamas's control over the aid entering the Gaza Strip has been a burning issue throughout the war. This is how Hamas maintains control over the civilian population. During aid distribution, Hamas terrorists supervise everything from the sidelines. Some trucks entering are humanitarian aid. Others are ordered by the local merchants. Regarding the aid trucks, if they are not completely looted, their distribution is coordinated with Hamas. As for merchants' trucks, taxes and payments are applied and collected on them by the Hamas authorities. As the Trump plan moves quickly into its second phase, it is important to remind the American president and the decision makers in Israel, Hamas must not be trusted. They will lie and they will deceive anything to remain in control. And speaking about Iran, the other issue looming this week is, of course, the dismantling of the Iranian Ayatollah regime. I stress the dismantling and not the possible dismantling because the Iranian regime will be dissolved either through negotiations or by force. This is not a never-ending story. The United States continues to move forces into the area, but is also looking to find a negotiated solution. As this is going on, sudden, simultaneous explosions literally popped up throughout the areas of Iran. Iran claims that these were just the results of multiple gas leaks. In one such tragic incident, the head of the Iranian Navy just happened to be the one unfortunate victim. Iran denies this and claims that it is not verified, but the commander himself has not been seen since. Over the years, such unexplained, strange phenomena have occurred throughout Iran, just as it has again this week. Spontaneous combustion in strategic locations is the premise for multiple books and TV scripts. Unlike the disappointing ending to Stranger Things series, here we can expect the story to be resolved and brought to a satisfying conclusion. Gaza and Iran, though, are not the centerpiece of the major event taking place. Pay attention to Trump. Notice his actions, not what he is saying. He constantly gives the media what it wants, empty headlines. He plays them to perfection. So connect the dots, not the words. The words, though, are never random. They are meant to distract, to derail, to confuse a specific audience, depending on the issue, each and every time. And it works like a charm, flawlessly. We are in the defining moment of the 21st century. The organizations created post-World War II have failed. When was the last time that the United Nations or any one of the international bodies that over the years have been overrun by Marxist, Islamo-fascist members and ideology, when have they done anything useful for the world population? The alternative infrastructure for handling world events that Trump created is what is going on here. There are those who will whine about him creating a US-controlled world. Well, personally, I prefer that. There is no vacuum in the world. Someone will rule it. I would rather it be ruled by the United States than any of the other alternatives. As we remember, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, they have all declined a position on the Board of Peace that Trump has created, and they cite Russia's presence for that. They claim Russia's war in the Ukraine, which these countries finance wholesale by purchasing Putin's oil and gas, offends their humanity and morality. Israeli pundit Valerie Obel writes that these countries have funded that entire gruesome war, and in the third year alone of Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, to the tune of 21.9 billion British pounds. Their insatiable thirst for Russian fossil fuel imports, despite the sanctions and efforts to reduce dependence, categorically subjugates their code of ethics. And as Obel puts it, the new authority Trump is constructing removes their opportunity to virtue signal by bashing Israel at the UN Assembly. These same countries are pushing for a Palestinian state to be established in Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip, even after the October 7th proved what this would mean to Israel. Where were these same countries before '67? They never once called for the creation of an Arab state until the Six-Day War. Trump made his disgust with Europe very clear because he understands what they refuse to see. Europe is done. Well, I'm also sure you've heard of the so-called doctor from Gaza who the New York Times let author 2 anti-Israeli opinion pieces. He was revealed to be a colonel in the Hamas terror organization, according to NGO Monitor and the IDF. A photograph shows that the doctor, Hossam Abu Safiya, wearing Hamas military camouflage uniform, doing a gathering of Hamas elite personnel, which raises questions about disclosure, about how terror groups exploit civilian institutions in wartime, and how Western human rights groups and the media outlets collaborate with these terrorist groups. New York Times gave him a platform because he is a doctor, but it ignores the reports that medical doctors in Gaza murdered a hostage and the so-called Gazan medical staff abused other hostages. You can read about it online, but I want to share another aspect of the propaganda campaign that we are facing. When I checked on this specific incident on an AI platform, I noticed something that was very telling. When I asked about Dr. Abu Safiya and the revelations about his terror connections, the system immediately added a disclaimer that the information came from primarily Israeli sources, never mentioning the photo. It conditioned the validity of the exposure. But when I asked about another issue that is frequently discussed in the media, such as the number of Gaza casualties in the war, figures that come directly from Hamas-run bodies, the platform presented those numbers as unquestioned fact, with no condition at all. That asymmetry speaks for itself. If Israeli-sourced information requires a warning label, but Hamas-affiliated data is treated as neutral and authoritative, this is clear that there is a bias that we know is rooted in politics. So is AI being programmed with political bias? Well, it could be. But after all, it is a mathematical algorithm that expresses its responses based on the content it goes through. Unfortunately, by sheer volume and quantity of negativity, Israel is at a clear disadvantage. The media does maintain a bias when it comes to reporting from Israel. I have mentioned the New York Times several times, and we are all familiar with the mainstream media bias. But even conservative outlets like the New York Post, which is not considered anti Israel in any form, has a headline like this: Israel reportedly kills 32 in airstrikes in Gaza while targeting Hamas for systematically violating the ceasefire. The real story is Hamas continues to violate the ceasefire, stores weapons in civilian areas, and carries out assaults through tunnels against Israeli forces who then strike back to eliminate the threat. That should be the focus of the headline. Media outlets, though, stick to the deceptive clickbait to get you inside so they can get more money for each viewer. But it's not just the media. There is a concerted effort to delegitimize Israel. This bias doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a much wider effort to shape how Israel is perceived, especially by young people. Encyclopedia Britannica, for generations considered the gold standard of reliable information, has fallen to this. A British legal group recently revealed that Encyclopedia Britannica has effectively erased Israel from its children's educational platform, Britannica Kids, deliberately rewriting a false history presented to children as fact. According to the UK Lawyers for Israel organization, several entries label the entire area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea simply as Palestine, with no mention of the modern state of Israel. Maps on the site shade all of Israel and the PA areas as Palestine, creating what the group calls a picture in which Israel does not exist at all. The group also argues that the Britannica misuses the term Palestine for ancient historical periods in which the name did not even exist. They note that the term Syria-Palestina was introduced only after Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, and applying it to biblical eras distorts historical record. Caroline Turner, the organization's director, warned that materials risk presenting modern political narratives as historical fact, and she called for an urgent correction of the entries and maps to prevent misleading children about Middle Eastern history. And then there was this event in Barcelona. A massive Solidarity with Palestine event filled an arena with thousands of people cheering slogans like "From the river to the sea." Giant screens displayed maps of Israel labeled entirely as Palestine, portraying Israelis as temporary occupiers. The son of a convicted terrorist was applauded on stage, and football manager Pep Guardiola stood there in a keffiyeh declaring, "I stand with Palestine." Local Jews are warning of a sharp rise in anti-Semitism in Spain, and the city authorities are encouraging it. So when you put all of this together, the media-biased reporting, AI platforms that treat Israeli information as suspect, but Hamas information as fact, the Encyclopedia Britannica rewriting history for children, and European arenas cheering on for a world without Israel, you start to see the whole picture. This is not a random or accidental, but a coordinated cultural, political, and technological campaign to deny the very existence and legitimacy of the State of Israel. And unless we call it out, unless we expose it, this narrative becomes the default lens through which the next generation understands the Middle East and understands us. Western media and many left-wing NGOs are not driven by a genuine concern for human rights or for saving lives. All you have to do is look at how they respond or fail to respond to other atrocities around the world. Because when the victims aren't connected to Israel, their outrage suddenly evaporates. Since the latest wave of demonstrations erupted in Iran, the regime has been executing doctors and nurses simply for treating wounded protesters. And what did one of the loudest human rights groups, Doctors Without Borders, manage to say about that? A single timid line: "We are not authorized to carry out activities beyond the scope of our projects focused on marginalized communities in Iran." That's it. As the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated, there was no condemnation, no moral urgency, just a bureaucratic disclaimer from an organization that never hesitates to accuse Israel of the worst crimes imaginable. If it's not Israel, they don't care. How fast were they out there on the streets, virtue signaling, condemning Israel's acts of self-defense? How fast were they evaluating every move, every strike that Israel did? Now, silence. No concerned editorials, no items of comparison, no heart-wrenching photos and articles, no NGOs berating or raising statistics. No UN resolutions, no European leaders warning, expressing concern. This is exactly what we see from parts of the Israeli left. They align themselves with the very groups that refuse to condemn the murderous brutality of Hamas and the atrocities that they are committing in Gaza. Instead of confronting that reality, they focus their outrage on Israel's actions of self-defense. Actions made necessary by a terrorist organization that spent 20 years building an underground military empire designed to hide behind its own civilians, maximize casualties, and weaponize international opinion as just another layer of their own protection. And it works. Israel has become the target of a chorus of useful idiots who pressure it to stop mid-operation, to pull back, to let the terrorists survive and preserve their ruthless, oppressive rule. One of the self-righteous voices on the Israeli left this week sanctimoniously warned that our grandchildren will have to deal with what we are doing today. But he and other condescending leeches never stopped to consider the far more terrifying alternative: what our grandchildren would face if we hadn't fought back. People like him need constant reminders of what we were fighting for on that day. They need to remember the brutality we confronted, the kind of enemy that proudly targeted civilians and built an entire military machine under schools, hospitals, and civilian homes. History is full of moments when democracies understand that survival sometimes demands terrible, unavoidable choices. No one in Britain or France agonized over the morality of bombing Dresden or carpet bombing Nazi cities. Few in the United States believed that using atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was unnecessary. None of them had a problem with the ruins they left in the cities of their sworn enemies. They all understood that if they didn't act decisively, their own children and grandchildren would be living under fascist tyranny. The only difference is that in our case, our children would not be living at all. The same principle applies here. If we fail to completely dismantle the jihadist infrastructure that Hamas has built over 20 years, both the physical network and the ideological one, then our grandchildren won't be debating morality in the comfort of studios. They will be living the fate that the Yazidis, the Christians, and so many other minorities across the Middle East who were slaughtered, enslaved, or driven from their homes by the same brand of fanaticism. That is the real moral equation. And pretending otherwise is absolute moral blindness. In Israel, we're entering an election year, which will happen at the latest by the end of October. So the ideological political war is brewing. Just weeks after the war began, the initial solidarity that the country experienced broke down, and the protest movement returned to attacking the government, demanding its resignation and calling for elections. There were two completely different political narratives in Israel over the past 2 years. One encouraging total victory, supporting the soldiers and calling on the government to continue the war until total victory, which will include the release of the hostages. And the other, putting the hostage ordeal in center stage, making the topic and the emotional identification as a political weapon against the government and making them the center of the national conversation. Interviews, reports, live broadcasts from the square and from Kaplan with demonstrations every Saturday night. This focus on the hostages had a clear political dimension. Families were encouraged to attack the government, and there was selective exposure. Anti-government families received microphones, supporters did not. But there was another reason for choosing the hostage narrative. The left believed that the tragedy of the hostages in Gaza would accompany us for years, and it would be an open wound. This choice turned out to be a mistake. All the hostages have been returned, and the media has lost its central narrative. No hostages, no hostage families, no broadcast from the square. The main argument of the left against the government has evaporated. So this past week, they created a new issue. The government is to blame for the violence that we're experiencing in Muslim communities throughout Israel and their violent behavior. The left wing joined the Arab citizens at a demonstration in Tel Aviv. not in any of the Arab towns or municipalities, mind you. And alongside the politicians and the population who never condemned Hamas and never spoke a word in favor of the Israeli hostages. This may have worked if we were back in 1993. Back then, many Israelis believed in peace with the PLO and even territorial concessions. Many of us warned against trusting them. We warned to beware of what the Muslims are saying. But most people here woke up to the dangers they were warned about only after the tragedy of October 7th. A majority of us now are opposed to any Arab control, and as the Prime Minister said, no independent PLO presence between the Jordan River and the sea. And while the left wing here are engaged in its usual useless virtue signaling with Muslims at home, the government of Israel is moving forward with cooperations with Muslim countries on the global stage, and in some areas faster than ever. Israel and Azerbaijan this week signed a memorandum of understanding on artificial intelligence at the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. It's another step in Israel's push to position itself as a world leader in AI, one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's flagship goals. This comes right on the heels of last month's joint AI declaration with the United States. The agreement with Azerbaijan is designed to deepen the strategic alliance between the two countries through advanced technology. The partnership will focus on supercomputing infrastructure, applying AI in critical civilian sectors, developing human capital, and launching joint research initiatives. So, even as the political system here is gearing up for an election year, and the media is doing its usual thing of tearing the country apart, Prime Minister Netanyahu, well, he is here to help. Check out the latest TikTok trend to understand what I mean. He is focused on the needs of the country and the future, building long-term strategic partnerships that will shape the next decade. Well, I hope all of this has given you some insights on the events. Join me again next week to decipher what will take place between now and then. I'm Daniel Seaman. Thank you for watching Straight Up from the JNS TV studios here in Jerusalem, Israel.